Welcome everybody back to Beyond the Facade. I'm Doña Junta from Swap Me Chronicles.
Hi, I'm Sabrina from Observing Spooks and Other Vices.
Yeah, we're glad to be back, and we have an exciting new show today. And we will be discussing the Sleepy Lagoon murder and the Zoot Suit riots that happened right after. And the reason for that is because during this week coming up on the 3rd is the 78-year anniversary one memory of the Zoot Suit riots. So we wanted to have a special episode to talk about that because the history is kind of still unknown, right?
Not only is it unknown, but it's pretty personal, I would say. At least I feel it's personal to me. I would say it's personal to a lot of Mexican American Chicanos out here, especially in California.
Yeah, like I had heard about it, the events kind of through time, but never in full detail. And it was not until college, and because it was so long ago, I don't really remember like details like about the events and so until I started doing the research again. And I mean, for me personally, that's kind of how it started, doing more research now based on the events that happened. But I think it's really important to talk about it for the new generation that maybe has no idea about this, and for the older generation to kind of remember this history as well.
There's a lot about zoot suiters that I can relate to. They are Mexican Americans in this country. A lot of them are children of immigrants. They are neither American and they're not Mexican, and they're stuck in the middle. They are trying to make a name and a identity for themselves, and their parents, they're not like their parents. They can't really relate to their parents, and then they're the American, white America, Anglo America around them in Los Angeles, they can't conform to them either. So they're these outcasts, and they try to behave in a way that's identifying for them.
Yeah, so we'll definitely get into the murder, what led to that murder, and also what led to the Zoot Suit riot, and just our thoughts of that history now, how we even got to, I guess, this point, not just on like highlighting the anniversary, but there's other things that came into play that made us know that it was important to bring up this history again, or not even again, just highlight it for everybody so we could remember this and keep it present because history has been repeating itself. I did want to mention that I did read a book. Some of the research I did was from a book called Murder at Sleepy Lagoon, and it was by Eduardo Obregon Pagan, and he's a professor in Arizona, I believe. And he has been an expert in researching the history of the whole murder and the riots. I know Sabrina has seen a documentary that she shared, which that we've been researching all that based on different sources. But he's kind of a his book, he gets into really all these details of what was going on, and I really enjoy that about his book. So what a lot of it, what we learn has been from him, and just some of the other research we done.
Thank you, Professor Lopez, by the
Yeah,
way.
shout out to
I just
him, Professor
Yeah, thanks, Professor
Pagan.
Lopez. Professor Pagan too, but my Professor Lopez right now.
Oh, okay,
She
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So this is personal for us on so many levels. And I won't go too deep into them at this moment, but I had a essay I had to write just recently on the Zoot Suit riots, which with accumulating issues or accumulating research that we were doing, which had nothing to do with Zoot Suit riots or anything to do with the Sleepy Lagoon murders, it kind of spurred me into obsession. And
Yes,
thank you for
and
going
we'll
down this
share how
rabbit hole
that
with me.
happened, which was very a beautiful type of development in your life, right?
Well,
How that came.
definitely a development.
Yeah. But I
A
so
full
we'll start
circle
off
moment.
we'll start off sharing just describing the time. So the era of LA, Los Angeles in the 40s. So you want to go ahead and share what did LA look at like in 1943? I mean, how
Uh,
was it? What was the vibe?
Well, the vibe was very Angelino. And what I mean by that is you have this Spanish style Mexican city with Mexican names and Spanish names, but white people were the dominant, Anglo Americans, we'll say. Anglo Americans were the dominant people living there. And you had small little towns that were segregated. Yes, there was segregation in Los Angeles.
Barrios.
Barrios. Me roll my R's. I'm trying. So barrios, and where there was majority Mexican people, there were other different nationalities there as
Yeah.
well. But the
Yeah.
which Pagan really brought up that I didn't even realize. Honestly, you
Hmm.
forget how many different nationalities and from different countries people that were living here. But back to Los Angeles during the 1940s, for perspective and for point of view, Pearl Harbor happened in December 1941. So we're officially at war and during World War II, and our troops are in Europe fighting Nazis. A lot of men left to go fight in the war, leaving the women to go and man and the go man and take care of the job of the family at different jobs, and where men were in manufacturing jobs, as we needed these manufacturing goods for wartime efforts. There was rationing. There were a lot of kids that were taking care of a two-parent family, now kind of in the middle because their mom's working in a manufacturer or different company, whereas she was a housewife before, and now you have dad out fighting the war. Patriotism, we have to support our troops. We hear this to this day. So you have that going on. And then you have this big disconnect. You have an influx of immigrant workers. They are here manning or not manning, but taking care of the fields and farming
Hmm.
and doing a lot of the other jobs, since a lot of the troops are gone, or our men are gone at this point. We have their offspring, their children, that some of them were born in Mexico. A lot of them were born here in the United States. They're growing up, and it's 1942, and they're teenagers stuck in a city, stuck in a country where they belong and yet they don't belong. Their parents are old fashioned,
Very
very,
conservative parents,
very conservative,
for many of them.
Catholic, very strict, I'm sure.
Hmm.
And then you have Anglo Americans where they're segregated against, and they don't fit into either worlds. And I can relate to that on so many levels. They're just teenagers. Think about yourself when you're a teenager. What are you trying to do? You're trying to find your identity. You're trying to find who you are, find the people that you think you belong to. No different for these young Mexican teenagers. Well, not just Mexican, there's all different kinds of nationalities, but majority Mexican teenagers. And they did so by taking on the look of what Pagan calls drapes, and we know as zoot suits.
Yeah.
Eh,
And there was already a lot of tension in the air, like in the media, about delinquent youth kind of being chaotic. And that was already kind of in the air before the murder. So there was already a lot of kind of racial tension and things like that were happening
It's
towards the youth.
it's funny when you hear stories about the zoot suiters. They're walking down the street and they're zoot suits or drapes, whichever you prefer to call, but we'll just say zoot suits for argument's sake here. They're walking down the streets, 15, 16, and they're zoot suits, and they had the audacity to be cocky next to a white person. And so they're automatically looked at as these bad, delinquent kids that are walking around like that. Like, how dare they have the audacity to be walking down the street with that much, sass in their step, if you will. And you can only imagine how many Karens were out there like, oh my God, someone call the police.
I just imagine that in a Karen in 1940 something. Like,
But it
yeah.
was way worse. Yeah, the not that the police are on our side now, but definitely back then they had a lot more authority to do a lot more stuff back then. Let's also just to give you a full round picture, we're talking about a lot of the areas in Los Angeles, East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights. the Chavez Ravine. Let's also bring up the fact that you have an influx of naval and military people in Los Angeles waiting to be shipped out to war. And we had one not too far off. I'm not exactly sure where exactly it's
It
located
was a naval
from.
auxiliary type of station for training purposes. What is now, it was the Chavez Ravine area. It sounded like it was off Figueroa near that Chavez Ravine area, like at the bottom area somewhere. There's a map of it in Professor Bagan's book, but I believe that's not no longer there because we tried to look for it and I didn't see
We
anything.
did. We did an extensive investigation. We'll talk about that later, but we did. And we tried to find it. We couldn't find it. But it's definitely a naval auxiliary thingamajig, like she
It was
just said.
probably a temporary pop-up type of thing during the war. This is the whole ambiance of LA during that time. The racial tensions, the war, all this is going on. So what led to the murder of Jose Diaz? And Jose Diaz lived with his family in the very rural part, which is now considered Bell/Maywood, but back then it was unincorporated, like a rural part of Los Angeles. So he lived there with his family, and his family was Mexican immigrants, and he was born in Mexico too. So they lived in this area, and when I imagine the area personally, like I kind of wish I could see it. I wish I could be there. I not be there for the bad thing that happened, but I just wish I
No.
could see it.
Yeah, to see it like in its heyday and to see it with
Yeah.
the culture, the music, and the families and the liveliness.
Yeah, and I don't see any pictures of it. I haven't gone down deep, 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 but there's like hardly any photos of that I seen of that area. But the families, it was about 8 families that lived in this rural area near Bell, which is now Bell. I don't think the city was incorporated at the time, but it wasn't called Bell during that time. It was more the east southeast part of LA. And there was about 8 families living in bunkhouses. So it sounds like maybe very modest, like plain
Yeah.
one room
And
houses
that's
maybe.
probably Yeah, and that's probably why we don't have too many pictures of the area. It probably was super insignificant in the grand scale of things. It
Yes.
just, a little farming area.
Yeah, and all the families knew each other, and it was mostly Mexican immigrant families and a few, like, I think he said Italian or Croatian or something, a couple Asian maybe, 1 or 2, and they all were farming right there in the area, or they were working probably for whoever Williams was or whoever owned the land. They were working the land. There was a family called the Delgadillo family, and it was a family just like Jose Diaz. So Jose Diaz, and you could describe him more into detail when you talk about him, but he was his family and this other family, the Delgadillo family, were celebrating one of the daughter's 20th birthday party. So it sounded like it was a family with like several sisters, and they were going to have a traditional Mexican party with banda and food, and they invited about 30 families to come down, either from the area, the people they knew, to celebrate the party. And Jose Diaz, of course, because he lived there, he was invited. So tell us about Jose Diaz.
Okay, Jose Diaz was described as a nice young man. He was 22 years old.
Uh-huh.
He That Monday, this party was on a Saturday. That Monday, he was supposed to go look into enlisting or something to that effect, because he's not from this country. Whatever he could do to join the war effort. So he had that intention on Monday. So just a day later from this incident, he was an older brother, or the oldest brother, I believe, and just described as an overall good guy, a good kid.
So I'm going to share the screen for people that are seeing visual Jose Diaz. So this is him.
I guess it's a good that we're silent for a second, because he really deserves a little moment of silence in our respect,
Yeah.
because this big story, as we progress about the Zoot Suit riots, this was the catalyst to the Zoot Suit riots, and he's never mentioned. Not really. He's mentioned as the person who's murdered. He doesn't even really have a name in a lot of it. And this poor guy lost his life.
He went to the party because it's the neighborhood, right? It's his neighbors, and they were partying, drinking, eating good food. I'm sure. I would love to know what the menu was, but who knows? All of this started about 11 o'clock, and I could talk about. There was a group of boys called the Downey Boys. Downey was a neighboring city, and what they did was they might have been invited, who knows, and they were at the party with the Delgadios and every there's like 30 families there, 30 different groups or whatever families, and they were getting really drunk, and I guess they ran out of beer and got upset at the Delgadillo family, so they were like pissed that there was no more beer, and they were kind of being obnoxious, and they were like getting mad, and they ended up getting kicked out of the party because they're just being rude about the fact that the beer ran out. So they got mad and they were talking kind of crap, like leaving, like, because they got kicked out. And as they, remember it's a rural area, so I'm sure there's dirt roads. There's probably a lot of like, uh, maybe like greenery and things like that. That it's really dark and probably not a lot of good lighting. So they ended up leaving the party kind of pissed, and that's when they go towards Sleepy Lagoon. So you want to describe Sleepy Lagoon? What is Sleepy Lagoon? Because that's obviously we hear that name. What does that mean?
Sleepy Lagoon is an area in the city of Bell, Commerce, Haywood, all
Well, it
around
was
that
right
area.
there, but again, it didn't have a name back then.
It didn't, because it was rural, as you so described earlier. Just, hills, grass. There was a reservoir that a lot of the Mexican kids, or probably the families that live around that area, would be able to go and cool off in, because of segregation. They weren't allowed at the white pools. So this was, again, just a rural area, dirt roads, greenery, nothing, very, very back road kind of country, if you will, if you can imagine California being country-ish. So that's kind of what Sleepy Lagoon looked like.
Yeah, and it was named after a song that was popular at the time called Sleepy Lagoon. So, and it was also a makeout spot, a spot to hang out and drink low key and like be chill. I think growing up, we all had spots like that somewhere around town.
I
That,
never
that
did.
was their spot. Say that again?
I said, I never did.
No kind of low key like back spot that people went to. I mean,
I was being sarcastic.
imagine the Delgadillo party. The Downey Boys get kicked out. They go down the road. They pass Sleepy Lagoon, and they run into the next situation, which it's our next group of people from 38th Street, which they're all friends from 38th Street. You want to share about that?
Yeah. So Hank Leva is described as a tall, statuesque kind of guy with a big personality. He's one of the 38th Street boys. Him and his girlfriend were necking, so making out in Sleepy Lagoon, and I guess with friends next to them.
Yeah, they had
And
two carloads. It was their own
yeah,
car and then another car.
I don't remember that part. So as you said, there was two carloads. At some point, the Downey boys, or some boys, descended on them. We're going to say the Downey boys for argument's sake, descended down on them, and there was a scuffle. And Hank Levas and his girlfriend were beat up or accosted. And so Hank was very angry. He was a very proud young man.
Yeah, let
So
me show a picture of Frank to the audience.
okay,
The ones that are gonna see this on video, just so you could kind of get an idea of how he looks.
yeah, let's personalize this.
So yeah, he was what would be called, kind of a significant character or person that, was became part of this whole situation. So go ahead.
So he was known around where he lived. He was known as someone who was more outspoken. When there was a crime that happened, the cops would automatically pick him when it was a very drab description of who may have committed the crime. They would pick him up. He was outspoken, like I said. He stuck up for himself, which a lot of other kids didn't. So he was a very dare I say rambunctious kind of guy, and he got beat up, and he wasn't taking too kindly to the fact that he was beat up. So he talked to his
And his
friend.
girlfriend Dora did too, because she was trying to like block them from the Downey boys like kind of jumping him, and she was trying to block it, and she got hit in the meantime as well.
Yeah. And for his girlfriend's, honor, he gathered his 38th Street friends
They
and
went back to the neighborhood, yeah.
they did. They went back to the neighborhood and they said, "Hey, we got beat up. My girl got beat up." And I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And they said, "Let's go get them." And they went back to that same area at the Sleepy Lagoon area. And
Yes. And why
once
they went back? Because that's kind of where they figured they will find the Downey boys, right?
yeah, since they were in that location in the first place, near that location.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess a lot of is up for speculation because we don't know the play by play, but you hear the music and people are going to be there. So you go to the music and assume that, you're going to find the people that beat you up. And
Right.
that's when they pull up and they get out the car ready to descend
This is
upon.
about 11:30ish too, around that time.
They descend upon the party and start wreaking havoc and beating people up. And they notice a young Jose Diaz on the ground and bleeding from his head and
Well,
his
that was
mouth,
after like
and
a big
he's
rumble,
shallowly.
kind of, Um, they fought a while and then they called the cops, but then during the whole thing, somehow he was found.
People were scattering and running off. On the documentary I was watching, they described it like when they got out, the girls immediately saw him at some point, and the girls, because there were not just guys here from 38th Street Gang or 38th Street Boys or whatever you want to call them. There were also women there, young girls with them. Uh, they got out the car, and at least from the documentary that I saw, it said that they saw him, Jose Diaz, and they started trying to attend to him because he was bloody and shallowly breathing.
I
And
think
that's
they
how they
ended up running
described it.
off and left him there, and one of the 38
Yeah.
kids kicked them, or they did also try to hurt him still after, because they didn't know he was like dead or nothing like that, or he was dying actually. And because there was a
Yeah.
big
You
rumble, they
mentioned
kind of kicked him.
adrenaline.
Say that again?
Yeah. I said because of adrenaline, you're just like, I'm, anyone who's ever been in a fight would understand. You kind of see red and they see another guy. So yeah.
Yeah, so the
And
cops
then
ended up coming, and obviously his family was informed, and they ended up calling the paramedics or whatever it was at the time, and took him to 45 minutes away to General Hospital.
to where?
General Hospital.
Wait, one more time. Where was that?
General Hospital. See, that place is still there. Was still there. It's
It
been
was
there. Looming over the
78 years
city.
ago.
But it's
Looming
45
over the
minutes away.
city.
There's no freeways. He could have been saved probably now, but there's no freeways. He got to the hospital 3:30-ish, 4, and they couldn't save him, I guess. He passed away at General Hospital, which is
General
weird to
Hospital.
think, right?
In which way? Tell me.
That place is, had it touched so many parts of history.
And how it keeps on coming up. I'm telling you, all the different stories we're talking about, they're all interrelated and they're connected, which is hilarious because we didn't pick it like that. We just keep on picking interesting things that we're interested in, and they're just
And
all
lead back
connected.
to that.
It's paranormal.
They used his death as a catalyst for a whole slew of other things that happened next. Because prior to that, they didn't really care if a Mexican kid hurt another Mexican kid. It just wasn't significant. They didn't care. But this time they did, and it made it to what it became of the whole Sleepy Lagoon murder trial, and what's going to lead to the rest of it. And why did that happen?
it was politicized, and articles mostly put out by the Hearst newspapers throughout the
Yes.
country. People are reading about these delinquent Mexican kids in Los Angeles. And we already have so many problems abroad. Our men are gone, right? Our men are gone. We feel unsupported. We feel vulnerable. And we have these Mexican delinquents. And when this happened, when this young Jose Diaz, 22-year-old, bright future ahead of him, when he was murdered, this just was perfect for them to, perfect for the attorney general to say, hey, LAPD, snatch them up, throw the book at
Dragnet.
him, and lock the keys away.
Yeah, they 48 hours later they did a huge dragnet and gathered whoever looked Mexican under 25, over 12, and arrested them.
Over 600 people.
And that's a whole ton. So they were just going down the street looking for people. In the film that you shared, people were looking out their windows, behind their curtains. People were afraid to go outside. They were told to stay inside because if you did go outside and get caught up, you're going to get arrested if you're Mexican. And they were scouting all the barrios and everything. So it was a really scary time for a lot of people and families.
I mean, can you imagine? Like, think of just COVID. Think about not being able to go out of your house because of COVID and how isolated you felt. But you have a car, so imagine being like a family right there, and for a couple of days not really being able to go out of your house for fear for your own children being snatched up by a cop. I can't imagine how scary that might have felt.
Yeah. So throughout all this happening, the newspapers were sensationalizing everything, and how she said William Randolph Hearst, which was known for yellow journalism, and he had his newspaper here that was covering the area. I forget what the name. I can't think off the bat what the name of his newspaper is, but he was pretty much demonizing these Mexican kids, and it made things worse, right? Because now everybody was getting angry at this situation, and the kids and the youth. So it just, as we know, yellow journalism, or it just like any tabloid type of news, sensationalized it, makes it sound worse than it is.
Right? And as it is, these kids were looked at as like unpatriotic because they're spending money on their drapes, their suits, their zoot suits, and fabrics being
So
rationed.
describe the Zoot Suit, because Bagan, that there's a whole history on the Zoot Suit, which in LA was a particular type of way they wore the Zoot Suit, because Bagan was saying that the Zoot Suit, in all the actual true Zoot Suit, is very fancy, very expensive, and it
Yeah,
comes from the African American jazz culture. But in
it does.
LA, they kind of modified it to what was affordable to the kids, right?
Exactly. And these kids were working little odd jobs because of the war. There was more opportunity. So they had a couple of, pennies in their pocket, if you will. And he describes them as drapes. And if you
Could
are
you
there
describe
described
how a
like,
drape looks for people that don't know what that is?
I think, and I was just coming from somewhere before this, and I was listening to the same episode or the same documentary, and I think the gal who was the sister of
Have the
Hank Leyva's.
measurement if you want me to see it.
Yes, that's what I was talking about, the measurements. It was like a 40-inch knee
Yes.
and like a 12 or 11 or
10
12
inches at
inch
the cuff, high waisted,
at the cuff. Yeah.
and 40 inches
High
at the
waisted.
knee. So very
So they were
balloon.
ballooned.
Yes.
Yeah. So MC Hammer pants.
Yeah, pretty much
And
in a
much
more probably better quality fabric.
and much better quality
About kind
fabric.
of colorful designs, but yeah, the same kind of
Yeah.
concept.
The same kind of concept. It definitely stood out. They were definitely trying to make a statement. And in all my life, like I said, I can really relate to them on so many different levels, just trying to find their identity and trying not to fit in but stand out. So it because of their cockiness and the way that they dressed, it was just a recipe for disaster. And anyone who looked like that, or anyone who was Mexican, that was a boy, and sometimes even girls were getting pulled in as well. They were really, they didn't discriminate. They didn't really care if
Well,
you
the girls
had
were
a
just as
criminal
bad
record.
in their eyes.
Yes, the girls, and another way I can totally relate. Bad girls, dirty girls, and girls with razors in their hair, girls that fight like guys. I
Yes.
can relate on some levels. So they were, some were hauled in as well. Not as many as the men, but they were hauled in as well.
17 boys or men and women, because they were not all minors. Some were in their 20s. So there were 17 total at the end defendants. And they were being tried at the Hall of Justice, which is a whole Hall of Injustice, but that's a whole nother story. But that
By
trial
Judge.
was very politicized, like you said earlier. There was a lot of injustice happening during this trial for many reasons.
There was, right off the bat, Judge, I believe his name's Fricky,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
not freaky, but Fricky. He was a very very pro, I would say describe him as a pro incarceration, pro throw the book at them kind of judge, no nonsense kind of judge. LAPD went and got all those kids, let go of the ones, and kept the 16, 17 kids and charged them. The judge would not allow them to get a haircut. The judge
They
would not
were
allow them.
dirty.
They were
They
dirty.
didn't
They had
shower
had
and change all that time they were in jail.
they didn't, and he said he wanted them to look like that because it was pertinent to the case, which
Well, what
is,
does that make the jury think, right?
right off the bat they're wearing these drapey, pants, and they look like vagabonds.
Which was the opposite of the Zoot Suit style, which they love their clothes and they were proud of their clothes, right?
He
So
dehumanized them.
pretty much.
He dehumanized them, and he wouldn't allow their public defenders, their defense team, to talk to them privately. It wasn't long. The trial wasn't held long, and ultimately they were all charged.
I think the group of the boys went to San Quentin. Some did time in county jail, some did time in camps or like farms type of thing. But there was the group that did go to San Quentin. Hank got life in prison. Him and another boy got the most time, life in prison. And then the girls even treated even worse without due process. So they weren't even involved in the trial. They didn't get due process. And some sent to juvenile hall, but the most significant girl, Lorena Encinas, and I believe another girl were sent to California Youth Authority, Ventura School for Girls, until they aged out. So
Yeah,
they
no due
didn't even get
process.
involved in the acquittal. They were just kind of tossed away.
And I think that's really significant that we need to point that out. These
Yeah.
girls were considered bad girls, throwaway girls. They were locked up and they weren't even heard of after the fact. Like they were just gone for a chunk of their years.
And the reason they were treated more harshly was because they didn't want to cooperate or testify, or they just refused to speak. And the judge or whoever just was like, okay, well, we're going to make it harder for you guys. Yeah, so I have a couple. So Henry Leiva and Jose Ruiz and Robert Delis got life sentences, and then the rest had 5 years to life at San Quentin, and like I said, some in county jail and some in camp or county farms. So that's kind of like the majority of the sentences. And then I'll also share here with the audience that is watching a picture of all of them. So this is the defendants here, like a good chunk of them. And this is during the trial. These two are the Delgadillo sisters. So I mean, they testified because obviously this whole incident happened at their house.
Yeah, so
So
sad.
yeah, and this is while they were already in San Quentin. They had a boxing, but I like this picture, but also like their some of their names so you could see who they are. And then here's another one where it has like all their names here, the main ones that were involved.
Who is that one right there?
Which
Second
one?
to left. Can we read his name? The second on the top left. Second, him.
This?
No, him. Yeah.
Him?
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
kind of hard to read it. I could see Smiles, Henry Leyva's right here. John Padilla. And this one, I'm a little bit blind. I can't see that one. I think Jack here. So, yeah. So this is, they were still incarcerated during this time. So, or I think it was a photo, either post incarceration or right before. So let's see. So they got locked up, right? But then also during this time, Los
It
Angeles
started
was
it started a snowball effect.
now this other event happens, which was the
Well,
precursor pretty much. The precursor was this murder case. But 5 months later we get the Zoot Suit riots.
we do. And how did we get there? I mean, we have that huge stressor, the the death, the murder of Jose Diaz at Sleepy Lagoon, which was a huge precursor to Zoot Suit riots. But then we have these sailors,
Mm-hmm.
and they're stationed not far from these barrios. And the way they get back to their naval base is through them from a night on the town. So they're going into these neighborhoods, these segregated Mexican
And they're reading these
neighborhoods.
headlines too, the newspaper headlines.
And these naval men are from, these soldiers are from all over the United States. So they're not necessarily just from California. And you got to remember, Los Angeles was very diverse at that time,
Mm-hmm.
whereas, let's say, someone from Kentucky may not experience having dealing with Mexican people. And this is still, I mean, it's 2021 and it's still pretty racist here. Can you imagine what it was in 1942? So there's a lot of different little issues that had been going around even before Jose Diaz's murder
And let
with,
me interject really fast so we could also
sure,
add the Japanese internment was also happening during this time.
it was. So there's a lot of racism and patriotism and anti foreigners, anti immigrants, anti people who don't look the same as me. Even though in California during this time, not even a whole 100 years, was it? Oh, just a little over 100 years. No, not quite 100 years before the Zoot Suit riots, California was Mexico. So you just have to put things into perspective. The state of California became a state in 1850. June 3rd, 1943, sailors and some Zoot Suiters, some young
They were just
Mexican
talking shit to each
teenagers.
other pretty much. There was a lot of that going
They,
back.
yeah, they were the whole time there had been, and it just had been getting worse since the murder of Jose Diaz.
Yes.
Uh, they had words, they exchanged words, and it ended up becoming a scuffle. And the sailor was taken back to his naval base
Off
with a broken
Figueroa
jaw.
somewhere by Legion Park, off near the Chavez Ravine area.
And he was taken back with a broken jaw. And his sailors, his counterparts, were up in arms that these delinquents beat their sailor friend. So they grabbed their chains and other weapons that they could carry and went searching for Zoot Suiters. And they wreaked havoc on the city. They pulled out Mexican kids. They pulled out anyone who looked Mexican and beat them,
They stripped them naked and burned their clothes.
cut
There's
off their
several
ducktales.
different incidents.
There's
Throughout.
different incidents, but as she was saying, it at the end, the majority of the time, it came to them being stripped down to their underwear. Their clothes were put on fire, and some of them that had ducktails were cut off. Their hair was cut off.
So it just kicked off like pretty much 5 days all around the city of just rumbles and violence with from the sailors and the Zoot Suiters. I can't even imagine how that would be now. Like, I mean, maybe
It's
like the
it,
LA
it was
riots. I mean,
it
I
was
don't know.
most definitely a race riot. It was
Yeah,
most definitely a race riot. At some point, civilians were coming in. Civilians were driving military personnel to different areas, all the way up to Watts, all the way to places that weren't even where these clashes were happening. Uh, Civilians and military people were clashing with not just at some point, we're talking about 5 days in. At some point toward the very end, they're even, fighting with Filipinos and with African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And this is most definitely a war on race at this point.
Yeah. So that just kept going for 5 days. It's finally kind of simmered down, but it didn't really solve anything. There was no solution at the end to none of it. And the
No,
sailors never took accountability at all.
of
They were
course not.
never accused, they were never convicted of anything if they caused any harm at all.
And
They were looked at
just
as
to,
heroes.
just to interject in that part, the cops would sit here and watch all this stuff happen. They would watch the Zoot Suiters or Mexican people, whoever was targeted, getting beat up. And once they were done being beaten up by the sailors and the civilians, they would swoop in and arrest these victims of being beat. Can you imagine that? You're beat and then you're arrested for being part of being beat. I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, well, I say I can't imagine, but we see that with protests now, right? We go and protest, and the cops go and pepper spray you and stuff for just going and holding a sign that says like "Don't hurt me," and they spray you in the face. It's ironic, but yet it's not.
So yeah, then finally it ends, at least like the fighting, and then not much was done except that the council banned zoot suits. I mean, pretty much blaming the Mexican kids. You can't wear them, and it became a law. You can't wear them.
And what does that mean? That means like we outlaw your identity. We outlaw who you are trying to portray yourself as to the world. You cannot be that person. We don't allow you to be that person.
So this happened June 3rd, which is next week. 78 years. It lasted 5 days. And at the same time, the kids that were convicted in the Sleepy Lagoon, the young people convicted in the Sleepy Lagoon case, had no idea this was going on. It was not really connected, but it was also intersected in a way, right? But they didn't know what was going on while they were in
Yeah,
jail.
they had no idea. They were fighting their own battle. Many of Hollywood, stars and elites were getting defense for these young people because they knew that what had happened to them was unlawful, and they petitioned the court to get these
Yeah,
young people
they
off.
had a bunch of advocates got together to form a legal defense team made up of attorneys, even a communist party at the time, Hollywood people, like she said, to appeal their conviction. So they worked hard to do that. It's ironic because Orson Welles was also part of that team to help them, and he played William Random Hearst in Citizen Kane. So that's a weird thing right there. I thought it was weird.
No, it's and Hearst follows me. What like I was in Virginia City, which is neither here nor there, but it's just like again, it's all intersecting, and
So Orson
it's
Welles,
interesting how
not the real Hearst, was actually an advocate for the kids. So they ended up getting acquitted October 1944. So this is way up, shortly after the Zoot Suit riots, and they ended up getting acquitted, and they were set free from the Hall of Justice. Mind you, the girls were not. They had to age out till they were 21. They were not part of the acquittal process. I don't know really why that happened, but unfortunately they weren't. So they got left behind. But the
of
boys
course.
did get acquitted. It was reversed. And, from there they had to live their lives. But unfortunately, it took a lot of toll on them. on the young men from that case. They ended up having difficulties after that.
As any young person or any person would, you imagine the PTSD. Imagine your like, just think about where you live at the moment. Anyone who's listening right now, think about where you live. Think about that neighborhood being invaded by your own soldiers, and you can't go outside because if you do, they're going to beat you, and you have to live with that for the rest of your life. So imagine the young kids, like we're talking about 2, 3, 4-year-olds. Imagine what their recollection of this was, because they're the next generation coming up.
Yeah, and Hank had a hard time after that. He couldn't find a job and different things. He ended up getting in trouble and going back to prison, just pretty much because of his record and everything like that. And same thing with some of the other boys. But I would, like we were saying at one time, during that time, there was just no resources for Mexican American youth. There was not real true mental health resources. There was none of that. So they kind of just got thrown out and tried to mend their lives back again. But obviously it impacted them, and they kind of weren't the same after that. So they all kind of had some challenges, from what some of the research says. But it makes sense for that time that there just was not much going on, opportunities for Mexican American youth, probably even to get fully educated. I don't know. There's not much there for them. So that sadly, caused them to kind of have a revolving door in the the justice system. But in a nutshell, that's kind of what happened with this Sleepy Lagoon murder, which led to the Zoot Suit riots.
Yes. Um, Zoot Suit Riots, there's movies about it, there are songs written about it, but you don't really ever hear the history about it. I didn't hear about it growing up, going into primary school or high school age. I don't remember hearing anything about it. And it's really important that we make sure we highlight it and we take these stories and we lift them up, because it's our history. Like, our history is not just what's in that history book that they slap in front of you, where it talks about, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and the missions in California. There's so much more.
Yeah. And just to also, maybe the question is, who killed Jose Diaz? And it's a cold case. There was nobody ever got convicted of that. And again, they didn't even really bring him up in the trial as much, or he was just used as a scapegoat to vilify these Mexican American youth. So it was just a cold case at the end. Nothing was ever revealed of who might have done it. There is one theory that came out in the film and also written in the book, but there's also several theories that might have not been true. Who knows? Lorena Encinas, one of the young ladies that was refusing to cooperate, I guess on her deathbed in 1991 or something like that, confessed to her kids that her brother did it.
Yeah, her brother.
I think his name was Louis.
Yeah, I think so. It was either Louis
Louis,
or Luis, one or the other.
yeah, that he killed Jose Diaz. I guess he was kind of hanging out with the Downey boys at the time. It was never proven. The time frames of when he could have been there, could have not been there, were not ever connected. We'll never know if that was ever a true thing or not, or if there's somebody else involved. That's why they consider it a cold case. But he ended up committing suicide anyway, or he had a hard life himself. I don't know what he went through, but if it was because of that, maybe he was going through his own mental turmoil. So he ended up, committing suicide. Lorena died of an illness as well in 91. So unfortunately, a lot of the kids had a hard time. I can't say for every single one, because I'm sure others moved on, but some of the main people that we heard had some challenges. Yeah, so that's pretty much the story of both the Sleepy Lagoon and Zoot Suit Riot. So how it came to our memory now was kind of not on purpose. I guess it just kind of came out of some coincidences that happened.
It certainly did. Very unexpectedly and very quickly.
Yeah. So what happened was that we were finding a film location, right, for American Me.
Exactly. That's where
Yeah,
it
it was
all
a,
spurred.
if you're born and raised in LA, you probably know American Me. If you're a little bit older, 1992 American Me, Edward James Olmos, film about, the prison gang. Anyway, I wanted to see the apartments of where they filmed this because to me they were very significant. The style, like that Mexican party where they're like all dancing and the traditional party in the middle of the neighborhood. It just reminded me of childhood, things like that. So, and I didn't remember, it's not that I had the apartments in mind at all. The movie was on Netflix. So I watched the movie and I remember, I seen the apartments again, like, oh, I remember always in the back of my mind liking to see the background of these apartments. So I did some research, I found where they were at. We decided to go visit them in Boyle Heights, and they look exactly the same, maybe a little bit more rustic.
Maybe just a little.
Yeah, but that kind of started this whole like kind of
Conversation. The conversation
journey
of
to what led to this, right? How did you feel
exactly.
seeing these apartments for yourself?
Well, when you said, I was like, of course. I mean, American Me is a staple in a young young Mexican person in the 90s life, right? What year did it come out? 93?
92.
92. So I would have been, I don't want to say how old. I don't want to tell you guys, but I was young. And it was an important movie to me for many reasons. And I'll get to them in just a moment. We saw not the hotels, the apartments, and they look just like they do on the movie. And when it did, and I posted the apartments onto my social media, like a little video. I posted it with the song. I posted it with Slipping Into Darkness. And of course, if you've seen the movie, it's a very or I posted it with
Rock and
Rockin'
Robin.
Robin. Rockin' Robin. I apologize, everyone. Rockin' Robin. And there's a pivotal moment in the movie with that song. And it was very nostalgic to me. And so when we left, I was feeling a way that I hadn't felt in a very long time. Uh, we talked about it the whole drive home and the couple other things we
Well, we
did.
went to the mausoleum after, also in the scene,
We did.
which added
Yes,
to the nostalgia.
we did. And if you guys don't know anything about us, we like to do investigative work in person. So anything that we talk about, we've been there, we've been around inside somewhere. So we like to get the real feeling. And because of those two locations, I was filled with nostalgia from my childhood.
And the
This movie
concert
was so
too, right?
oh, we literally bought tickets to a concert to
I
go see
think
Los
that same day,
Lobos
right?
that same day. We got tickets to see Los Lobos, and who else is
Los Lobos
the
played
late
a soundtrack in American Me, Shotgun.
and they did Shotgun, and
Chris
Shotgun.
Toledo and the Lakesiders. So it kind of all connected in a weird way.
It did. And if you see us, I don't know how you judge us on how we look, or if you see our content, so you probably don't know anything about our childhood. But when I think of that movie, American Me, it's something that kind of feels in a weird way like family. So my family's not originally that far back in Los Angeles to the Zoot Suit riots. My Mexican side, I am of mixed race. I'm northern Western Europe or Western European descent, and then also I'm Mexican and Native American. My family, my Mexican and Native American family, came from New Mexico. So during that time of the Zoot Suit riots, we were in New Mexico. We've been in New Mexico for a millennia. We've been there for forever. My grandparents migrated over here or came to California like in the late 40s. So they missed that time. and my dad was born over here in California. During his childhood experience, and I didn't get to know my dad well, and I wish I could have asked him these questions now because they're so important to me now, but
Right.
uh he was, you know, a homeboy. He was I don't know if they would have called him a cholo back in like the 70s back then,
Mm-hmm.
but he was still of that. He was a gang member who was in and out of prison my entire life before he succumbed to his drug habit and died of an overdose when I was about 10. And when I see him and when I think about him, and it's very, I can relate him to American Me. Like, not saying that he, you know, was all mafiaed up or anything like that, but just the whole prison culture,
Yeah,
the whole
yeah.
70s, 60s culture. And I had a pivotal moment where I thought, man, like culture, that Pachuco culture from the Zoot Suit riots, it never really subsided. It just kind of turned into something else.
And in the
And
movie, they show the scene of that, the Zoot Suit
yeah,
riots in the
yeah,
opening scene,
the
right?
main character, his parents are a part of the Zoot Suit riots, are victims of the Zoot Suit riots. So it all connects to each other. And seeing this, I felt really, well, American Me got me all like inspired and obsessed, and I wanted to discuss more of American Me. And then next thing you know, the next week the teacher has me, or not just me, but has an assignment out for
So, what class are
um,
you taking that this assignment within?
sociology.
Okay.
And I have an essay I have to write about the Zoot Suit rights, hence the little documentary where I'm supposed to watch and then, you know, do an essay based on my opinion and the criteria that my Professor Lopez, hi again, asked. And after doing it, a lot of things clicked because, again, we know about the Zoot Suit riots, but you don't really hear about the Sleepy Lagoon murder. So a lot of things clicked, and I was obsessed. And I told you, like, oh my God, we have to do one on the Zoot Suit riots. And you're like, yeah, we have to, especially the timing. Like, it's right before the Zoot Suit riots anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And I just relate to those young Zoot Suiters or kiddos wearing drapes back then because of my mixed heritage. I was never white enough to be white, and I'm definitely not Mexican enough to be Mexican. Don't speak Spanish, or I can understand it a little bit, but I don't speak it. And trying to identify with something and trying to be a part of, and never feeling a part of either culture, feeling this really big disconnect. And because of my lifestyle, my father, dying at a young age, I never really got to know him like how I wish I could have known him. I end up making choices. My kids' father's from the same, neighborhood that my dad's from. My kid's dad's from there. I followed his footsteps. I lived a similar life in a sense. I mean, I wasn't incarcerated, thank goodness. And the thing is, and why it was such a big deal to me and why I was so obsessed is because who I am now is definitely not who I was back then. And I almost kind of like I've pushed it so far away because I did not want to end up in the same kind of lifestyle or
Mm-hmm.
stuck where a lot of people that I know that are my age or a little bit older during my generation, some people are still stuck. They never really evolved. They still have the same hairstyle. They still wear the same clothes back in the 90s. And they didn't evolve and go on to bigger and better things for different reasons. Each person's different. I didn't want that for my life. And also, I had a bunch of young kids. I didn't want that for their life either. And so I pushed that lifestyle back, or who I was. And I don't want to say lifestyle because it really was who I was in that young age. That's where I came from. That's who my dad was. That's, kind of like a core of who I was for many years.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't identify as that anymore because I'm so much more than just one thing. But I don't think until just recently realized that I can still acknowledge that, and it doesn't take away from who I am
Right.
now,
Mm-hmm.
which is completely different. I'm all over the place. I have so many interests and so forth. And wear many different titles and do different things. But it was like coming to terms with my young years, teenage years, my father, and this culture that I pushed away for so long. And I was able to embrace it and really process what it is and what I was going through and be proud of what it is. Not everything. I mean, we can't be proud of murders and a whole lot of the culture, but we have to see where the culture led us, like where it came from and how we got to where we are today. And it all goes down to racism, the segregation. A lot of it's never stopped. A lot of the things that the young Zoot Suiters went through, it's the same thing it is today. And or maybe not today, but when in the 90s when we were going through it, we there's a lot of socioeconomic things that we still deal with back then. And now I'm rambling. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, back in the 90s, there was all the era of tough on crime laws because of, the gangs. So it just kind of never went away. It just caught categorized differently or just stated differently. But yeah, so that whole scenario kind of came full circle for her and us, and we decided to explore more of Sleepy Lagoon. We went to the area where it actually happened. It's completely erased. There is nothing there at all that would tell you that this was a rural Los Angeles County area. It's all industrial,
No,
modern buildings.
I didn't realize how sad I was gonna be about that until after like just a couple days ago. Like in fact, Fridays when I really felt the weight of the fact that that place is completely industrial. It's nothing but warehouses and companies. That whole history is completely erased.
Yes. But I do have to give a shout out to the city of Bell because the mayor and one of the council people there are working on getting a monument in the city of Maywood at the park to remember Sleepy Lagoon and everything that happened there. So they're still working on that. They've been doing that for a few years. There's just funding issues, but the same reason like that we think it was just erased. Like they wanted to remember that by having some kind of statue or monument in that area. So hopefully they do get to do that. And if there's a way that we could help, we probably will. And we'll let everybody know, see if there's any more
Definitely.
updates on that. But yeah, the area is completely erased. It didn't feel like anything really would have happened there like that at all.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine civilized like a rural town, like not a town, but like a homestead. It's hard to imagine people living there because all you see is like train tracks and vehicles and industrial and street and pavement and freeway. You see nothing.
And all the other areas we went to visit too. I mean, Main Street, pretty much all brand new. I mean, modern. Excuse me. We went to Elysian Park, which does have a little bit of energy. We went to that one stump area, the camping area was very
Yeah,
kind of odd.
it was there was something different there. It was something definitely non-human presence and maybe past spirits there.
But one
That
thing
place
really
is a little
beautiful is
interesting.
we did go visit Jose Diaz's grave, and
We
he is
did.
buried at Calvary Cemetery in East LA off Whittier Boulevard in Downey. And we found his grave, and I thought it would be nice to, visit him, give him flowers, spend a little time just remembering him. How did you feel about visiting
It
him?
was really nice. I was super, I don't want to say pumped. I know you guys are like pumped. I love cemeteries. I'm a taphophile. I could stay in cemeteries all day long for picnics, for dinners, sleep. I've slept in cemeteries and I've done other things in cemeteries and we'll leave it at that. But I was pumped to go visit Jose Diaz. I was super pumped. And when we got there and we sat down next to his headstone and we had a conversation with him and with each other, yes, we had a conversation with him. Uh, I felt really sad. I don't know if it's the fact that I have children his age and or that a whole riot was spurred due to his murder, and he was politicized, and he never really got his what he deserved. He never got any kind of, no one got closure for him, and it's all forgotten. He's forgotten. We told him we'd go visit him, maybe on his date of death, which is in August. We'll
Yeah.
see. But I felt really sad. I didn't feel really sad, like I'm so sad, but it felt sad. It felt sad. How did you feel?
Yeah, it was, I mean, like all places, cemeteries, I mean, it does bring a peaceful feeling. It's never been like scary or anything to me. So it was nice. And it was nice that we were able to remember him and, share some time because yes, he was definitely forgotten and even though it was a murder and he died, they didn't really care about that. It was just for other reasons, like she said, and that's sad. And the family never got justice or nothing. So, I mean, it was cool that we're able to visit and now remember him. And we'll add a photo of the everything later on in the video and on our Instagram, of what it looks like if you like to go visit. But so yeah, that was nice being able to go to the sites, even though it's not the same for many of these places anymore. But just being able to remember it and know that something happened is important.
It's really important when we talk about these histories, when you want to see it from your perspective, you have to see where it came from, like where exactly this happened at. And then you kind of humanize the story. A lot of this history is just, words in a book or in a documentary or wherever you're getting the information from. But when you go walk into someone's history and you see it, it's a whole different feeling. So
Yeah,
it was really good to get on top of the Chavez Ravine or Dodger Stadium, and that's a whole nother story within itself about the atrocity there. But it was a good idea because I've never seen it the way that I saw it on Friday, where we looked at basically where the houses would have been, how people would get to and from, and to what distance it is to Los Angeles, like downtown Los Angeles.
right.
So seeing it from that perspective was really important for me. And it's crazy to think that people lived in like a little ravine like that or canyon. I would die walking up and down those hills. But it really puts things into perspective how you could see where the sailors would be going into their barrios and going into downtown LA and coming back. We did go to 77th precinct as well.
Yeah, that was another when they got arrested, they were sent there for the most part. So I mean, before we wrap it up, there is going to be an event next Saturday for the Zoot Suit Riot anniversary, 78-year anniversary, and it's thrown by Zoot Suit Riot Crews. You could find them on Instagram. They're organizing an actual. You could, if you have a classic car, like a bomb or anything like that, they want, they're gonna do a cruise in memory of the riots. So and now they're going to meet at the end at Lincoln Park. So I think that's definitely
Awesome.
important to do that. Follow me on Swami Chronicles on Instagram and
Hold on.
Observing Spooks and Other Vices. And thank you for sharing this history with us. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.